Hello. So I'm asking this question here rather rhetorically because the answer is yes. I attended a homeschool conference yesterday, National Hybrid Schools Conference. It is the third National Homeschool Hybrid School Conference. My business partner dragged me, um, and we went and we talked to other homeschool programs and I guess leaders in the homeschool industry. Yeah, I said industry. I've been homeschooling since 2003, and I've always been aware that there were these programs that started small and grew really fast and kind of became, small business and home business. But kind of that was the kind of theme of the whole thing was if you run a small homeschool program, here's how you scale up, here's how you decide if you're going to leave, here's how you leave, because responsibly, if you start a school, you need to close that school responsibly. Um, Here's some techniques you can use. Here's what else did I watch? It was a con. It was a conference, and so there were different rooms you could go into, and I went to some, and my business partner went to others, so that we could absorb as much as possible. And we'll talk about these things on Monday. Um, but the first thing that bothered me was the definitions. Um, when my kids were in early years of homeschooling and they went to a homeschool program like the one I run, my husband told people who asked about our schooling because talking about homeschooling 2003 to 2010 was a little hard. So my husband would say, my kids go to an exclusive private school that meets twice a week. Like that worked for people. I would say my kids go to a homeschool, school. Oh, you can't see my hand. A homeschool school. I would say my kids go to a homeschool school. You get a little tilt of the head, but they kind of understood that, right? But now, I promise you, there's a homeschool program or three in every city, especially where I live in Georgia, Gwinnett County. And I think I was a little bothered by, first of all, from what I understand, the crowd has tripled over the last couple of years. And second, the conference seemed to be dominated by men, which is new to me in the world of homeschooling that I've been in for 20 years. Like, there's always been like a man in the background supporting the woman who was running the homeschool conference. Um, and there's always been, when the programs get big, the men have always stopped whatever they were doing and jumped in and lent their skills to their now thriving family business. But this time it was men with a lot of money in their pockets looking to kind of start their own individual homeschool conglomerates. Um, and, the whole theme seemed to be, we're a lot of small micro schools and micro pods. And a pod is less than a dozen kids. A micro school, I think. Some people were saying up to 100, but I feel like a micro school is less than 50. And I think my program is actually more of a hybrid school because we meet for a partial week and kids are supposed to get their stuff done at home. And a hybrid school could get very big or it could stay small. We're kind of a micro school, hybrid school. Um, that's neither here nor there. But as I said, what bothered me was how many men were there and how many men with pockets were there and the kinds of things they were saying to us. Um, like, beware of funding. Like, they clearly had funds, but they were telling us beware of funding. Beware of, not funding per se. I can't think of the word, but they were saying beware of big funders, kind of like the Bill Gates Foundation and things like that. Now, I saw what the Bill Gates Foundation did to Khan Academy, and that had to slowly be like rejuvenated and fixed. So someone with big pockets can come and like change your program from what you meant it to be. But I talk about that on this channel about being clear to what you want your homeschool program to be before you put it out there so that people can't change it. And on my business channel, She's Best Publishing, we talk a lot about mission and vision. Do you see this? This high point was COVID, and now it's kind of settled back in to something that seemed more natural, actually. Yeah, it was already rising when COVID hit, and then it shot up, and now it's settled back down to people who are probably going to keep homeschooling. So notice this conference has gone on 3 years, right when homeschooling hit the high point, right when people, financiers, and big business people and serial entrepreneurs saw that there was movement and possibly money in it. And, I came home to my husband, I'm like, I'm concerned because it looks like a lot of men in private industry with a lot of money in their pocket are about to sweep into our cottage industry and turn it into a big industry. Now, I guess that's the way of finance, when they have us all together trying to be like, we're a team. But, bruh, I literally don't trust it. But clearly homeschooling has grown tremendously. And in places like my state, which I don't see on this thing here, where we've kind of fallen in education, a lot more people are starting to homeschool. Okay. So there's a 4% decrease in homeschool enrollment since 2018. That's interesting. But I can understand it because a lot of people swept into the homeschooling scene in my county, went to people who had smallish homeschool programs and said, we're going to homeschool with you guys. We hate what's happening in public schools due to COVID. Help us homeschool. And these people said, bet. And they rented space. They put in their money. They put in their resources. They grew their programs prematurely. All these new people flooded in. And then when the parents realize that it's not the same as school, where you can't just drop off your kids and magic is going to happen, and then they get grades and everyone's hunky-dory because it's only a couple of days a week. On those other days, the parents are going to actually have to engage with their kids. We've dropped in numbers. But the conference I was at yesterday was kind of more of a nationwide deal, and nationwide things are still pretty high, as you saw from the previous graph. So that's Gwinnett. Gwinnett is a wealthy county. That's where I've raised my kids, and that's where my program is. But the city of Atlanta, there's a 10% increase in homeschool enrollment from, where it was before all this started. I don't know if 2017, 2018 is a good place to start because it's still lower than it was 2018, 2019, the school year before COVID happened. But once again, there was that big jump and then thus settling back down for number of homeschool students enrolled. When you say number of homeschool students enrolled, you're specifically talking about kids who were in public school and then transferred to homeschool, or kids who have reached like the age of school, like first grade, and have homeschooled. This does not count the millions of people who say that they're homeschooling their preschooler or kindergartner. You don't have to enroll children that young into homeschooling. So those are the numbers, and that's how homeschooling has grown. I'm actually surprised that Atlanta isn't bigger, but there's a reason, and we're going to get to that in a second. Parents are kind of doing the teaching, but they aren't doing the teaching. Back in the day when I started homeschooling, with the exception of the program I was in, where parents didn't do the teaching. A select few parents did the teaching. And so that's kind of what I'm saying. What happens is one parent decides they want to homeschool. And that parent is aware that their child needs community. That parent also wants to control who's in that community. And that parent wants to control everything being taught. And there are other parents who are just trying to make a living, or maybe they're high-powered business, maybe they're lawyers, doctors, whatever, and they also want their kids homeschooled. So they turn to that first person, and that first person runs a program. So they might be doing the teaching, and they're hiring other teachers, but back in the old days, even before I started homeschooling, 5 or 6 stay-at-home moms would get together, each figure out what their subject was, and they would teach their kids corporately. When you hear the word homeschool co-op, that's what that is. It doesn't cost anyone anything per se, just like curriculum books and things like that. And each parent takes turns teaching kids subjects. So that's kind of how that worked. But as you can see from this Washington Post article, that's really not how that's going right now. Interestingly, several of the programs that you can see they're in the person's house. Several of the programs that I talked to yesterday they're like, I have a micro school. I run a micro school. Have our school, and here's how we're doing. And I'm like, what's your facility? And they're like, my house. And I was like, oh. In Georgia, where we live, most of us are in gated communities, and that would never be allowed. So we tend to go to local churches and centers and things like that. So in Georgia, it costs money to run a homeschool program, more money than in states where everyone isn't in a gated or neighborhood association type deal. And so parents have to pay more because the person running it has to pay, facility costs. But my program is a converted warehouse. That's where I'm at. It's the best price I could get right now. And I'm busting at the seams. I need more space. But I can't get more space without more money. And with so many people with such big pockets busting in, it's about to get real super competitive. Speaking about real super competitive, let's talk about the competition with public schools. July 2022. The year when homeschooling, the year after, the end of the year when homeschooling had hit its height, right? So 1920 was when everyone was doing online school. 2021 to 2022 was when everyone flocked to homeschooling. And there was a mass exodus from schools. And in Cobb County, Georgia specifically, which is about an hour from where my homeschool program is, kids were being pulled out of school in huge numbers. Black children were being pulled out of school even faster because some of the racism that was happening in Cobb County schools over the decades, which is why I refuse to live in Cobb County, they kind of hit, how much they were going to take of that. And they just started pulling out their kids and putting them in homeschool programs like Classical Conversations, big names that sounded familiar, that they felt comfortable with. And so somebody started reporting all of these programs to the fire marshal, all of them. And most of these programs, because like I said, we can't just have them in our homes because most of us live in neighborhood associations here in, Georgia, not rural Georgia, suburban Georgia. So they were using churches that may or may not have been zoned for daycare or for school use. And the fire marshal told all these people, this is all the money it's going to cost you to be able to run these homeschool programs. You have to do these things, buildings have to be changed, etc. and so forth. And some of the churches are like, fine, we'll make the concessions and make the changes. And some of the homeschool programs had to find somewhere else to be, and some of the homeschool programs closed. What I found out yesterday is that the year before, fortunately, something called a Pod Protection Act, the Learning Pod Protection Act, had been put into law that exempted the gatherings from local and state building and fire codes. But not everybody knew that. So before a homeschool legal defense, and not HSLDA, other ones, before the homeschool legal defense programs could jump in and say, hey, well, you can't make these people stop what they're doing because we signed a law that protects them. Several of these programs had closed, but many of them survived and were able to keep going on as before for this reason. Because there was actually a Protection Act in place that allows homeschool programs to operate out of churches and non-school buildings. And that's actually really good news because I work out of a converted warehouse and I've always thought that I couldn't have little kids in there. But if there's a Pod Protection Act, because I just do middle and high, if there's a Pod Protection Act, that may also allow me to have smaller children in there because I do not need a certificate of occupancy that is meant for schools. So that's good news. But here's where a lot of the conversation was happening yesterday. In my state, there's a $6,500 school voucher coming to Georgia. It passed the Georgia Senate, I think on March 20th. And it's going to give $6,500 to kids in public schools who are looking to move into private schools or homeschooling. That does nothing for my county. You saw Gwinnett has a lower incidence of homeschooling now. It's because it's kind of a wealthy county, wealthy-ish county. I know very many families who are housing insecure there, but it's a wealthier county. And so I think you have to be in the lower 25th percentile, and each family has to individually apply for that voucher, showing that your district school is in that lower 25th percentile before they will give you that money to then spend in the type of education and on the type of education materials that you see fit for your school. I guess the good news is that I am planning on opening an online program this year, and so maybe someone who lives in a lesser school district could use those funds, apply for and use those funds to use my program. But my children who are in my city, which has good-ish schools, lots of fights, lots of gun drills, they won't qualify. I looked it up. The only schools in my county that are the 25th percentile are what I call the, what is this all? This is what I call the throwaway schools, or the push-out schools, where they push lower performing kids or kids with a little bit of an attitude problem into very poor schools for very bad kids. So in that case, those are the only kids who could qualify for that money in my county, are the kids who are being forced into those really poor performing schools because they got into some kind of trouble in their zoned school. So, as I said, homeschooling is becoming big business. A lot of people were talking about creating family legacies, creating family businesses. One guy was talking about building a school and then finding the right person to take it over, and so that their vision could thrive and they could leave behind a legacy. Like they were talking about funding programs and then getting a program started and then moving on to the next school or then moving on to the next business. I think that's what bothered me the most. That couple that said they were serial entrepreneurs, and at a moment in time they wanted a school that was perfect for their kids. No one else's, just theirs. And that's what homeschooling is, but that's supposed to be for your kids. And, they started a school. It grew really, 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 really fast. And then when their kids graduated, they found people to replace them and went on about their business. I think that's what bothers me the most. I'm done homeschooling. I am that person that feels like I'm not going to do anything unless I feel real secure that I'm going to do a really good job. And I'm 55 now. I was homeschooling from the age 32 to age 42. And during that stage in my life, I would have never dared put myself in charge of educating other people's children because I knew that I didn't know everything I had to know. And my ego was never so big that I thought I could tell other people how to educate their kids or make a school and grow this population that I'm responsible for without feeling fully equipped. And so I guess what's bothering me is that these young people, and I don't have a problem with 30 and 40-year-olds starting homeschool programs, but to start them for the 5 to 7 years that your kids are going to be in them and then bounce, leaving behind these big populations and handing it over to someone else, I find that a little bit irresponsible. I find it very self-serving. And I find the money that's being thrown behind that a little scary. Can I do anything about it? No. Is some of this going to be really good? Yeah. But, I did that video last week on the Smiths, on Willow Smith in particular, and her family starting a homeschool program. And what did it last? 3 years? Like, that's what I'm afraid of, is a lot of people going too big too fast and then walking away from the schools. And I really want people to be careful and mindful. And there's nothing wrong with running a school for 5 years and then moving on. But you need to be setting up a school for more than just your kids. And you need to be setting up the school in a way that it is the word that they kept using, sustainable. I was hearing the word sustainable. I wasn't seeing the word sustainable. That's it. So yeah, homeschooling is becoming big business. If you step into it, please do it responsibly. Till next time.